Let's chat about Steinhoff, which is an integrated retailer that manufactures, sources, and retails furniture and household goods in Europe, Africa, and Australasia.
So the important thing here, and we're going to spend a fair bit of time because it's a fun company to talk about, is it's not really a South African concern anymore. They have by far their largest retail interest selling furniture in the European continent. Conforama is the name of the business, and they've also added businesses in Eastern Europe and in Germany and all sorts of other regions, Austria. And remember also they're in the process of acquiring Pepkor and listing on the market in Frankfurt. So this creates a very dynamic and interesting situation, and a share price is pushed all the way through the 70 rands a share mark.
And it's also a stock that has been a favorite of the hot stocks portfolio. It's done very well for us in the past, Paul. Market cap here of 231 billion rand, PE ratio of 16.2, dividend yield of just over 2%. Mia, are you enthusiastic about the Steinhoff story?
I am. I think it's an exciting story, especially within the sector, probably the most exciting we're going to get. Also, it's so diversified. For South African investors, it's a great opportunity to have some of your capital invested in a company that's actually generating all its returns from abroad. It has become an increasing offshore story. It's been acquiring businesses and actually utilizing the synergies between these businesses to increase their earnings offshore. And now we're seeing QE coming through in Europe, and that might actually have a very positive effect on this company, especially considering that they're selling furniture and now going to be one of the largest retailers, I think already the third largest retailer, if I'm not mistaken, in Europe, and they're going to just grow that through the acquisition of Pepkor. So I think it's an exciting thing.
Well, Paul, the share price is certainly looking exciting.
Yeah. I remember when it first came to the market, because it sort of did a reverse engineering, and then Bruno Steinhoff, the name was a German guy who Markus Jooste, the CEO, did a deal with. It had like a 50 billion rand market cap almost from the beginning, and now look at it, 231. Fantastic success story. Look, these are risk takers. Markus Jooste and his colleagues have always been not shy of a deal. We know that the global group now has the European interests. It has a controlling interest in JD Group here. We'll talk about JD separately. It also has those cap businesses where they put all the PG bison and timber manufacturing. But what it's going to become is what's more important, and it's already following the DAX in Germany. It's going to become a DAX 30 member because it's got sufficient market cap, and it's probably one of the few European retailers that has rebound potential because of Europe's recovery, because there's a lot of people that didn't buy beds and TVs and all the rest of it for a while. Plus, it's going to have the Pepkor emerging market aspirant consumer element, because in Europe, of course, there are too many old people, and so retailers worry about future revenue growth. It's got all of that. It's going to be fabulous.
So a robust investment story there, but is it too expensive?
Well, I think it has run, but exactly what Paul mentioned now, you're buying this company for what it's going to become. And it still has, I think, a lot of legs to go on. It hasn't really seen the benefits through the earnings from all the synergies coming through in Europe. And then, as we mentioned, Pepkor, I think that's a great story for Steinhoff. I think Steinhoff in this deal was probably clearly one of the biggest winners alongside a single shareholder there. But so I just think that this company has a lot to offer. I think it's going to become less cyclical in terms of its earnings, up and downs, due to the fact that it's now going to go into like clothing retail with Pepkor as well. So it's an exciting story for me, and I think if you're willing to take a long-term view, this is probably something you want to invest in.
Well, our game is all about the long term, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, look, I think it's already tracking the DAX, but it's got a fabulous German name. So when it comes to the market, people are going to be saying, this Steinhoff sounds good, and then they're going to look at the assets and they're going to see, Australia with Pepkor, they're going to see Africa, which sounds kind of exotic and exciting. They're going to see, France, Italy, Spain, Austria,
You've
Eastern
previously
Europe.
commented on Markus Jooste's risk appetite and the fact that you buy into what he is doing. How much is this about the Markus Jooste story?
It's interesting because his reputation here in South Africa hasn't always been A grade. A lot of people in the investment community have viewed him with a bit of skepticism, and that's because when I say their risk appetite is high, I really mean it is very high. He is not at all unambitious. We're talking about what he's doing now. For all I know, he's busy off talking to the people who control Tesco about buying them. Or maybe he's gone to, Bentonville, Arkansas to go and see if he can put in a cheeky bid for Walmart. These guys are extremely ambitious. They're not afraid of debt. They have quite complex financial statements because they're not afraid of debt. But he's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of the game. I think he now increasingly sees himself playing on a global stage with regard to retail, and that's why they're going into the Frankfurt market. I've no doubt that they will issue new shares or raise a lot of debt. There's a lot of corporate debt available in the European market. I think you really have to think of this thing now as a global player and wanting to get a lot larger.
Have you been exposed, your clients been exposed to the Steinhoff story?
Some of our clients have been exposed. We haven't really had the entry point that we've hoped for, but this is one of those companies that I don't think you're going to ever acquire very cheap. So if you want to buy into the story, I think there's a good as time as now to do it.
The risks, Paul, what are the risks to the downside?
Good point, because we've seen already with Steinhoff back in 2006, 2007, 2008, things were going great, and then suddenly there was the global financial crisis. They were caught with a high level of debt. They were caught sort of with a half-baked buyout deal for JD Group at a much higher price than they eventually got it. So there is that. I mean, if we were to experience a real negative moment in Europe associated with, say, Grexit or Grexident or whatever they're calling it, if there were to be an Eastern European invasion by the Russians.
Your point is that it is tied to the geopolitical environment and also to the macroeconomic
because,
environment.
if you are, low risk, you are conservative, you don't have a whole lot of debt, you're not in the middle of 6 deals and you have a global downturn, well, it doesn't really matter. You just bat on and you do your best and no one really worries too much. But if you're like Steinhoff is, with always 6 things on the go at the same time, with a ship which has got the following wind, you could really see some very negative downsides. So it's not necessarily a stock for widows and orphans and for everybody. But, I'm an optimist, so I'm inclined to think none of those negative scenarios are going to happen, of course.
Of course, hot or not, Mia,
I'm
on
hot on
Steinhoff.
this, hot.
Paul, hot or not?
Yeah, I'm hot on it, and I think it is increasingly something to put into the portfolio because of all of these factors we've talked about, definitely.